Today, for this episode of the Future Humans 3.0 vodcast show, I'm honored to introduce a very special guest, Dr. Bejamin Outram. Bejamin is your true modern-day polymath. He's a developer, scientist, technologist, and an artist from England. And his latest VR game, Squingle, has received top star ratings and reviews, with VRItalia saying it's one of the most fascinating and original things ever seen in the world of video games. And the game was selected as the best VR Game Nominee at GDWC in 2021. Dr. Bejamin is a super intelligent and bright person with his professional and research interests, including virtual reality, augmented reality, machine learning, AI, synthetic data, computer vision, liquid crystals, display technology, computer-human interfaces, telepresence, haptics, and multimodal media technology. And he then learned to speak Japanese and completed a Tokyo-based JSPS Post-doctoral Fellowship at the Embodied Media with Keio Media Design in virtual reality and media technology. So welcome, Dr. Bejamin, to the Fellowship. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks for the introduction.
Fantastic. Well, first of all, I'd love to talk about your latest VR game, Squingle, and what was the process like developing the game and the genesis of it?
Yeah, so, well, first of all, maybe I'll describe what Squingle is, because I'm sure, a lot of people might not be familiar with the game.
Yes.
But essentially, it's a virtual reality game / experience where you have to guide rotating orbs through sort of celestial intestinal puzzle shaped structures.
Yes.
To get to the end without hitting the edges. And you also have to make sure that you are rotating in the right direction to go around certain parts of the puzzle.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been a long time in the process, this game. I guess it took about a year and a half of actual sort of hardcore, full-time, late nights, lots of coffee development time to make the game. But it's been, and the scope of it has kind of creeped and increased over time. I was never going to make it into a big sort of commercial game.
Yes.
But as it went and the prototype was made and people really thought it was quite a nice mechanic and a lot of fun to play, it became obvious that I had a really good idea here that could maybe be spun out into something a little bit bigger and a bit more successful. And then actually it was because of the pandemic that I was kind of put on sort of furlough, I guess, if you will, with like my day job. And so I had about a year of time, or over a year of time, where I had very little work from my main client. So I just had the opportunity, instead of quitting and finding another job, I decided to just go with this, which was essentially a hobby project to start with, and really spin it out into a proper full-fledged game that people could enjoy. So, and I think it's been an extremely satisfying process to do that. I'm very happy with the result.
It's incredible and such an achievement. And so, can you see when I'm sharing the gameplay here? I'm just checking.
Yeah, I can. Yeah.
Yeah. So, as you would describe it, it's like this spiraling psychedelic puzzle VR game. And so, I'm very fascinated, how you perceive liquid crystals. Did that inspire the visual aesthetic of these puzzles from your studies?
Yeah, absolutely, that's right. In fact, first of all, liquid crystals are this very interesting, trippy, inspiring phase of matter, which they never tell you about in school, because they're more complicated than liquids and solids and gases, but they're extremely important for the existence of life.
Right.
In fact, every single lipid membrane in your nerve cells and your brain cells is a liquid crystal, and the same with other things like soap bubbles. And obviously people maybe mostly know liquid crystals from liquid crystal displays, LCDs, where they're very important for, they're very sensitive to electric fields and they interact with light in particular ways. And I did a PhD in liquid crystal display technology, and I spent a lot of time looking down microscopes at liquid crystals, which are extremely beautiful and exotic things. And they form these very strange melting structures, and there's a lot of photos of them on my website, and I did some video work as well. So in terms of creating like an aesthetic for a game, I've always thought that liquid crystals would be a really interesting basis because of their flowing, beautiful structures, but also because of the multicolors and beautiful birefringent colors you get from the spectra of the light coming through the microscope through these liquid crystal materials. And so actually all of the textures, or many of the textures in the environment and also on the Squingle puzzles themselves, are lifted from liquid crystal photos. Wow. And all the colors are sampled from liquid crystal photos. Wow. And then also everything is kind of this iridescent quality to it, right?
Yes.
So that's another very critical part of the aesthetic in the game, and liquid crystals produce that kind of iridescence, which is why bubbles are iridescent. And you get it means it's got that sort of shimmery color. Yes. To it.
I love the aesthetic as well as the gameplay, obviously, but just even like the storytelling or the conceptual storytelling meets the gameplay, which I guess leads to my next question, because like when you play the game, you're greeted with, is it Squingle, and it says like the universe won't create itself, and then you dive into the game, and does this kind of relate to the creation of life and liquid crystals and, I don't know, DNA?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's obviously the game's got a very psychedelic theme, yes. And I think for me, the psychedelic experience is one that confronts you with, well, I mean, I guess it's different for everyone, but it confronts you with, playfulness, and sort of philosophical thoughts about the origin of the universe, or your existence or like why or the how, or just the very presence of everything. Quite a lot of sort of Buddhist themes, which are very interesting and to think about, and are very apparent in the game. And there's this idea that the game is sort of structured around this around the creation, metamorphosis of life and transcendence. And at the beginning, it's called form, and it's sort of the Big Bang and the origin of the universe. And there's the environments are actually, if you look out, and especially the first level and many of the levels, it's there's the cosmic microwave background radiation data, which is taken by some science experiment by a big telescope, and probes the sort of the first moment that the universe was visible after the Big Bang. So it's like, it sort of represents the Big Bang and information about the quantum nature of the Big Bang and the universe. And that's sort of real data that's then used as a backdrop for the environment. So there's this idea that you're helping this goddess character, Squingle, who's this sort of slightly sort of paradoxical, sort of Buddhist guide, teacher type character, who is some sort of beyond time and space, but needs help to create the universe or something like that, and create the Big Bang. And then the game goes through all these higher levels of complexity, and you've got life, birth, life, and sort of then love, and the experience of transcendence through the end.
Like, because it's was it like form, birth, love, awake, life and awake, and so it's so cool how you've fit the levels into this transcendence path. It's so interesting and innovative and different, and it really ties humanity into the game at such a fundamental level, which I've never seen anything like that before.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's kind of, the game it's a puzzle game, so it's nothing that it's like the fact that there's the game and then there's this story of transcendence. They're kind of sort of shoved together, but there is a sort of idea that the game is quite topological. And so, the universe is also very topological, and there's these puzzles and the way that atoms are structured, and they create molecules, and that creates life. And there's this something very mechanical and inventive about it. And that's somehow replicated or apparent in the gameplay, where it's quite creative, it's quite playful, but it's also very topological. You have to be going in the right direction to go through certain paths, and some of the paths are sort of like DNA spirals that sort of replicate life and DNA and the structure of the things going on in our bodies as well.
It's really cool because it's spatial. So you're guiding these two, was it orbs, right? Through this iridescent maze, and to get to that bubble thing at the other end of the puzzle. What does the bubble represent? The end, or?
Yeah, well, I guess obviously, the bubble is the goal in each level. There are that you have to go from A to B, basically, is the puzzle, and you have to go through the puzzle to the goal. And then there's also checkpoints where you can get to, and then if you die by hitting the edge or hitting enemies or something, you just go back to the last checkpoint. The actual structure and shape of the bubble itself, which is quite interesting shape, is inspired by and actually lifted from the mathematics that describes the shape of the electrons in a atomic nucleus or in an atom. So there's, each atom has a nucleus, and then it's got these electrons flying around it. And in school, we kind of learn that it looks like the solar system thing. But, if you go into university and you learn about electron orbitals, you learn actually that the electron isn't a little thing flying around, but it's these sort of lobed, flower-like spherical, they're called spherical harmonics, where this wave function of the electron as a stable state in a spherical arrangement, which might be lobed or like have rings or have these very interesting, beautiful structures. And so there's a lot of that sort of motif in the game. All the dust particles, if you noticed around, are these transforming energy states of the electrons. And then the goal is also this 3D electron orbital spherical harmonic shape.
Yes, it's so cool. And it's like when you play the game and you get better at it, you work out the right velocity for, which puzzle and how to coordinate with your spatial gestures as you're weaving your way through the puzzle. And you encounter these little, it like flips it the other way around to go in the opposite direction, and it makes this very it's the same frequency and noise. There's two different noises that it makes. Is there a particular reason for that particular sound and frequency?
So the sound design was done by a friend of mine who I met at a game jam in London. And actually, like, I'm not really very close to this sort of game development or indie dev scene, but I've dipped my toe in a couple of times, and I've been to like one game jam. And at that game jam, I kind of found the person who had the virtual reality equipment. And I went over to that table because I wanted to do something, with virtual reality. And I made, a couple of really good friends there, who very skillful people, who then I ended up sort of hiring as freelancers to do various aspects of this game. And one of them, Kai Jones, did all of the audio in the game. And he was just sort of starting out at that time. So, he did it very cheaply, which I almost feel guilty about now, because I'm sure he charges a much higher rate now because he's really, really good. But he did all the sound effects and the music.
So how did you approach the whole process of the haptics and, with the VR, and do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, so haptics are really important to me because I've explored a lot in the past about haptics can be used in virtual reality for different purposes. So there was one project I was doing at Keio Media Design in Tokyo, you mentioned, called Crystal Vibes. And it was a piece that was designed to work with this full body haptic vibration suit. So, at the moment, most consumer hardware just has like the haptics in the controllers, and the new PSVR 2 is going to have haptics in the headset as well, which is kind of interesting. But they obviously in the university department, and it was a collaboration also with Tetsuya Mizuguchi and Enhanced Games, who were using it primarily as a sort of marketing piece for the Res Infinite, and which is obviously a very famous PSVR and also now PC VR game. And so I had the opportunity to create some content for that. But I was interested, in terms of the research side, a little bit more in like how haptics can be used, especially when on a whole body suit, but like how can it be used? And there's various ways it can be used. You can use it to represent sort of sound as a sort of sensory substitution thing. So maybe like you have those haptic vests that like pulsate with the bass or something like that.
Yes.
Then you could also use it as a sense of touch, a substitution for touch. So if someone in the virtual world touches you, maybe you can feel the vibration, or if someone shoots you, you can feel the vibration. And then there's a third way, which is like as a sort of symbolic thing. So for example, if you shoot an enemy in res, it's very common. If you shoot an enemy, you get a vibration and different patterns of vibration based on different things that happen in the game world. Or like another example is like if you get a text message and your phone vibrates, that's a symbolic vibration. Yes. It's not a metaphor for touch or a substitution for audio. It's an indicator for a symbolic bit of information about something that's happening in the world. So I wanted to experiment with some of those aspects in Squingle, and I think the symbolic representation of sound and and also representing events is a very compelling use for vibration, but also this sense of touch is really compelling. And I think not many games actually have that in them. So yes. In Squingle, like these balls and you're inside this tube, and the tube itself is kind of springy and elasticated. So yes. When you touch it, it kind of bulges out and you get some resistance, and you can feel and you can see you can't go through the wall. And also the vibration, you feel this sort of sense of vibration. And because you see that physical interaction, the springy interaction with the wall, at the same time as feeling this sense of vibration, it gives quite a compelling sense of touch and physicality to the environment, and almost like feels like a force, even though there is no force. Yes. It's just a vibration. But the visual metaphor along with the vibration can give you that almost sense of force, haptics, which is quite an interesting thing to explore.
It's so interesting. And when you were saying like shooting games, you can feel like the haptics, but what's really cool about Squingle is it's not like a traditional shooter game. Like you're feeling different sensations that more create this sense of a flow state. Personally, how I felt, and it's like it does feel very flowy, and like that elasticity. That was a great way of how you mentioned it, and almost like bubbles and like vibrations, and you truly have created this sense of you're feeling like an inventor of the universe. Like you feel like you're creating, like it's amazing. So how did you get in that mindset and actually develop that specifically?
So no, it's a great question. I love that question because it links together a lot of different things. I mean, for me, this idea of flow is something I've explored a bit. More my colleagues have explored it, but it's a big part of this game. And philosophy of Tetsuya Mizuguchi, who has done Res and Tetris Effect and Space Channel 5 and Lumens on portable devices. And his whole philosophy in gaming is you want to get people into that flow state, into the beat and into the music and into the interactivity and a constant interaction. And something, basically the kind of game that you could play on psychedelic drugs, basically. I think that playing something very complicated with a lot of you have to be intellectual about, like an escape room, for example, that could be challenging if you're really high. But if you're playing something like Res or something, it's very immediate. And so it's a different quality to it, that sort of flow state. So
I have a question about brainwaves, right? So I'm into meditation. I'm sure you are too. And so the whole idea is to get into that deeper brainwave state to slow the world down, right? And I feel like this game is trying to achieve that as well. And I'm sure haptics had a lot to do with it, with obviously the visual aesthetic as well as the sound, the whole multi-sensory experience. So were you obviously you were cognizant of the fact of like brainwaves as well, and how that relates with haptics and everything.
Yeah, I mean, there are some interesting sort of speculations. I'm not sure if there's much science behind it, but how things like binaural sound can interact with brainwaves, or maybe haptics might be. In fact, we've done some studies at Keio Media Design where they do EEG while people are playing rares in a full body haptic vibration suit, and to see, I don't think there was any conclusive stuff with that. I mean, those experiments are notoriously difficult to perform just because of the complexity of the hardware and the electromagnetic sensors that you need. And, you've got this electronic headset as well, which probably interferes with all of that stuff. And that they don't work well if you're moving around too much as well, which obviously in a game you tend to be moving a bit more. So I mean, I don't really know that much about that aspect of it, but certainly in terms of meditation, that is something I'm very interested in. And and I know there's been a lot of studies with looking at brainwaves of meditators and deep meditators in specific sort of states of mind,
like monks.
So I mean, Squingle definitely isn't meditation, but it's definitely motivated and inspired by the meditative process and the sort of the Eightfold Path and Buddhist philosophies and themes. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. I definitely have to think as I'm doing the puzzles. It's not like you can just go full on meditation, but I feel like it's like this it's a flow. And so it's like, for me, it's like, if I'm performing at a music festival or attending one, and you get lost in a DJ mix, right? Of like a long mix, and the music's like blending together in a nice way, and you get in that flow state. That's what it feels like doing the puzzles when you work out the basics and you get in a flow. I feel that's how it feels.
Yeah, I mean, the actual game mechanic itself is quite sort of inspired by what people called flow toys, or another word is circus skills, right? Things like poi people use, or staff, or juggling balls and juggling toys. And juggling is a big part of my life. I used to juggle all the time. And especially at festivals, and also fire staff and stuff like that. So I was very fascinated about the possibility of like making the circus skill and the flow toy experience in virtual reality. And so I've tried to design a few different prototypes around that. One of the most successful was one which was actually called Flow Zone, which we did at a hackathon in Tokyo with a couple of colleagues of mine, and they actually took it after that and developed it out into a bit more stuff and started going to festivals with it and things. But that was poi, so we had these springy things with trails that you could swing around, like with the music, and the whole engineered to create the sense of flow and encourage people to move. And the more you move, the more visuals and music comes as well. So very much a sort of flow inducing mechanic. And then also I did a couple of other prototypes with juggling. So I'm very interested in juggling and how 3-ball juggling can be, or more balls could be converted into a virtual reality experience. So I did a couple of prototypes related to that as well. But the problem with juggling and a lot of these flow toys is they're actually quite difficult in real life, and it's also difficult in VR. And you could try and use VR to make it easier, but at the same time you're limited by you've only got controllers, whereas flow toys you can feel the squidginess of the balls and the weight and momentum of them and things, so it's a bit different. So they had limited success, I would say, which is why I didn't develop them further. But Squingle tries to take a lot of those concepts about juggling is all about playing with topology with balls, and they're rotating around each other, and obviously Squingle is also about playing with balls that are rotating around each other. And the beautiful topologies that you get in 3-ball juggling are sort of played out temporally through time and space in front of you, whereas in Squingle, obviously it's a bit different from that, because the balls are rotating and the topology is played out through the geometry, through space, through the level, which you then have to copy in order to get through the level.
Yes.
So there's a sort of parallel there with the juggling. And I'd say that those prototypes, the flow toys and the juggling prototypes, were very important in the foundation of creating this game mechanic.
It's so interesting because how that's the foundation for the gameplay and everything. Yet it's funny you're saying that it can be limiting compared to the actual feel like in the real world, and you know the level of difficulty, because we're limited still by the hardware. But the really cool thing about VR is that, and virtual worlds and everything, is that it can and gameplay is it can defy physics as well. So we've got we've got that to play with as well, like you know the physical world and the virtual world. But my next question for you is, have you ever considered the puzzle being in like augmented reality? So I know you have that overlay in the VR where you can change the setting, you know, so you're not in the cosmos, but you're like in simulated real world kind of environment. Would you ever consider like that gameplay being like overlaid in anywhere you could be in the real world when we have like say smart glasses?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, you know, there was a point at which I thought it'd be fun to try and do a version on the HoloLens 2.
Right.
I had a HoloLens 2 in my possession for a little while, and so I was like, I did one sort of trippy thing called where you have like confetti coming out of your fingers, and it's music sensitive reactive. So because the HoloLens and also the Quest can do hand tracking, so I developed this thing for that. In fact, you can get it on SideQuest. It's called Trippy Fingers.
Cool.
And you got music reactive confetti coming out of your fingers. But yeah, and I've certainly been fascinated by this explosion in pass-through AR prototypes that people are developing on the Quest 2.
Yeah.
And I know, like, for example, Thomas from Cubism, which is another famous puzzle game on the Quest, has done a sort of pass-through mode so that you can play the game in your own bedroom or whatever with the real world as a backdrop. And I mean, you know, I tried that, and my mind was blown, you know, and I think it's right that people's minds are blown, because it does represent a fundamentally new experience in the VR XR space. Yes. But it is a little bit sort of prototype at the moment. I'd love to. I think probably Squingle will eventually have that, but it does present a couple of challenges, because especially with Squingle, because in Squingle the shapes have this. They're iridescent, but they're also refractive, so they look like glass kind of thing. They refract the environment behind. If you look sort of, they look like glass. And in order to do that, you need to be able to like take the background into the game and do some processing on it. Whereas in the pass-through, you don't have. It's like a technical thing, but you don't have access to the actual image of the pass-through. I think for privacy concerns, you know, they don't want to give developers access to that, which is completely understandable. But it means I can't do that refractive thing. So it would look maybe a little bit weird, but it could still happen. Certainly in the future.
Right. And so what's your plans going forward with Squingle besides the
so at the
AR
moment, I'm trying to get it onto as many platforms as possible. Cool. So, I mean, Squingle is still currently on App Lab.
Yes.
So, I mean, I don't know if, you know, I don't know how to get it on the Quest store. So if anyone from Facebook's listening and Meta is listening, and I'm also working on the multiplayer side of things.
Cool. So what would that?
But that's a little bit
like?
Further. Yeah,
that's further down the line. Of course, we want to see this go mainstream adoption, because it's such a great game. So, what would the multiplayer game look like?
I've been thinking about this, and I think it needs a lot of prototyping to try out, see what's like really fun and things. Yes. But at the moment, I'm doing a sort of competitive multiplayer with up to 4 people that would be like and that they'd have special maps or like levels, especially for the multiplayer. And it would be sort of like a race, I guess, because you'd race and you have to collect as many of the green objects as possible. But obviously, if you're ahead, then you get priority. You hit them before the other person, and they respawn after some time, a bit like the boxes in Mario Kart.
Yeah.
So it would be like that, and then but it would be competitive, and there would be multiple routes around. So you can, and maybe some. I want to make sure that there's some tactical elements that come into the experience, but also that it's very accessible at any level.
Yeah.
So, but it's definitely a challenge to design something for multiplayer that's fundamentally it's a single player experience at the moment. So it needs some thought, but it's definitely something I'd like to be able to do to play Squingle.
And would you compete against an NPC at all, or it'd be
I
people to
think people
people?
to people, but yeah, it might be interesting to create a sort of NPC thing. I'd have to think about that. Yeah, I think most multiplayer games, when you play online, unless they're really, really popular games, then there's the secret is that no one tells you is that often you're actually playing against an NPC that you think is a human. So there might be something like that going on.
Exactly. No, but it's kind of fun to program that, try and beat the AI. So when you're developing these games and before it goes like to market, do you get your friends and family to try it out? Like, how do you know like how many people play it before
Yeah,
it's
it's a really good
released?
question, and it's something that I didn't really have too much experience with in terms of beta testing, but getting people's feedback on things early on is really important. And I think I made that mistake early on in prototypes for other experiences I've made, like especially one juggling one, which yeah, I mean, I think I spent a lot of time developing this quite polished thing, but then it wasn't actually that good from a sort of. I mean, I liked it, but then it's not about what you like and what you can do and what you can understand, because you're the developer. You understand obviously what you're making.
Yeah.
It's really about taking it to the public and going to for example, like a film festival or a game festival, and having the public try your game for the first time with no instruction. And you just see this huge variety of interaction that some people get it immediately, some people never get it. Some people are extremely good, others struggle, and you just see how people interact, and then you understand, what to do, what tutorials are needed, what nudges are needed, how the difficulty might be altered or adjusted. And there was an awful lot of that going on with Squingle, first of all, just amongst family and friends, but then also as an actual beta program where I had maybe like about 130 volunteer beta testers to play the game and give feedback. And that was critical, absolutely critical. I think only about 15% of those people actually gave feedback. It's actually quite hard to get. It's easy to get people to sign up stuff. It's hard to get people to give feedback. And I think that's quite normal. But the feedback that we did get was like gold. And even then post-release as well, suddenly people, we had a demo on the Steam Next Fest and people were playing it. Some people got really into it and were like really competing on the leaderboard on it. And they figured out how to break the game and find exploits like speedrunners do. And I had to like patch those up quickly to fix some of those things. So it got quite ruggedly tested at that point. But then just in terms of the progression and the easiness and the game level design and things like that, the beta test phase was really important. And that lasted about 3 months.
And how long did the actual whole game dev process, I think you said, was it a 12-month or?
I think it was about 12-month full time, and then another sort of probably like 6 months of work.
And was it in Unity?
On top of
was that the game engine?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, cool. I was gonna say, like, if you were never like inhibited by hardware, and well, I mean, we've got like the haptic suits, and you've studied that and all that. Would you ever think about brain and computer interfaces, or where we could go in the future with hardware and like full immersion? If that even will exist, it could very well could. I mean, we've already got like Neuralink and everything, but like, what would you envision be the ultimate kind of positive experience for gameplay with like this full immersion?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question about the future of technology and the direction that we're going as a species with, and our interaction with media technology in general. Because I guess a lot of people are picking up VR, but they don't necessarily think about it in its historical context in terms of, anthropology and the history of human interaction with these things. I mean, some people do as well, but you think about when language was first invented, obviously that was a sort of a natural invention that completely changed human society. Then you had things like the printing press, or just writing in general, and then more recently electronic communications, telecommunications, television, radio, and then most recently with the internet and internet 2.0, 3.0, and suddenly virtual reality and AI and all of these other sort of technologies that we are getting really excited about at the moment. And with each sort of evolution, there is an increase in the amount of information that can be shared, and how far and wide and to how many people, and also how democratized that information sharing becomes. So now obviously with things like YouTube and the internet, anyone can start a YouTube channel, anyone can be an influencer, anyone can share the funniest moments of their life and put it on TikTok, or make a living, connect them artists with producers or whatever. And that's a wonderful development. And with virtual reality, we're taking that sort of next step. And the way I see it is that media technology is kind of like, it's an interface between this gray matter of the human mind and our digital world and each other. And a big question for me is, what's the ultimate interface, and what's the ultimate content? And you talk about gaming. For me, gaming is like a stepping stone, and it's fun. Play is a spiritual activity as well. I mean, it's very important to not just work and talk about pragmatic stuff all the time. It's nice to be playful and to find that inner sort of child in ourselves as we go into adulthood. Otherwise, I think it's really important. So gaming shouldn't be, it's not that gaming is something that's not on a high level. It is on a high level, but I feel like there is also other aspects in what VR can do for us in terms of this sense of community, love, and sort of spiritual development, which I can imagine a future where we are connected and we have this brain interface and we're interacting with an AI which is teaching us and prompting us to just wake up, at every moment in some subtle and hyper intelligent way that we can't even imagine at the moment. And it'll give us this very strong liberation from ourselves, and from all the bad habits that we have, and so we can have a new kind of woken up perspective on things, but also an interaction with each other in a way that is so intensely intimate, and loving and compassionate and open, that it's very difficult for us to have at the moment. We have glimpses of it at certain times in our lives with certain people, if we're lucky, but those things will become much more pronounced. I hope that's the optimist's view of the future of technology. I think there's plenty of pessimistic viewpoints as well.
But I share that same positive. There's the word protopian. Kind of, but I share that optimistic sentiment because I believe in manifestation, and like you see whoever controls the media controls the mind, Jim Morrison, so it's like the media you consume is what you think, and it's the same thing with games, and I think it's great, like battle royale games, don't get me wrong, I love it, but there is something to be said about the lack of I don't know, like spiritual or like non-competitive but still competitive, but like more self-fulfilling kind of games. And I think we're in this very interesting time of history where everyone's talking about the metaverse, which is like this convergence of the physical and digital, is this evolution, right? And we've got blockchain and everything. And there's this real community spirit that's emerging, particularly for creative sort of people and creative types. And I'm really inspired by what you're doing, because I see that there's going to be a need for more of that as we scale and we build this metaverse as a society, and we spend more time, like with immersion, and we want to maintain our sense of self as well as like our self-sovereign identity, but also be able to connect like we've never connected before. And so putting the inputs into the AI of like good reflections on humanity, positive reflections of humanity, and same with gameplay. Like I was like just reading up the other day about like octalysis, which I'm sure you're all across, like game theory, and the motivational drivers, but that kind of applies to life, which is what you said, like spirituality and playfulness, and it doesn't matter how old you are, like everyone has the ability to play. And so that to me is like the power of gaming and storytelling that I'm really passionate about. So I guess my last question is back to Squingle. Is Squingle the source of life?
What is Squingle?
Yeah.
It's a good question. What is Squingle? I guess it's kind of designed to be an ambiguous term, which I don't know, might be everything, might be nothing, might be everything. Maybe it's the paradox of life, or the story of transcendence of the universe, or something like that.
Love it. What is the meaning of life?
To transcend. Probably. That's probably a bit of a cliche of an answer.
Interesting. Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Bejamin, for joining me today on the Holoship. And so where can everyone find you online and your game?
So the best place to go is squingle.com, probably squingle.com, and from there you can find the links to download the game, which is available through App Lab on Oculus Quest. It's also on Steam through Steam VR, so it's compatible with pretty much all PC VR headsets, and it's also on Vive Flow if anyone has got a Vive Flow. Yep. And it'll be coming to some new platforms in the not too distant future as well. So if you have some other VR headset, then maybe watch this space.
Watch this space for sure. Well, thank you again.
Yeah, no problem. It's been really fun to talk to you. You've had really great questions, and it's been fascinating.